For millions of years, humans thrived as nomadic, egalitarian hunter-gatherers. It was only around 10,000 years ago that a few societies around the world began to experiment with sedentism, agriculture, and hoarding of resources. These societies spurred feedback loops of growth, inequality, and environmental devastation, conquering and colonizing and domesticating everyone and everything in their path, causing the sixth mass extinction in the history of life on Earth. Today, we live in a world that is a mismatch of our evolution in more ways than one. We feel disconnected, isolated, and powerless. Can we find our way back to a life that better matches how humans ought to live? Can we learn about how to live well from other cultures who figured it out? Is there time to reverse our self destructive trajectory? How can we reclaim our wildness? These are the themes of the Rewilding podcast. I'm your host, Peter Michael Bauer. This podcast is produced and made possible from supporters on Patreon. Thank you. If the Rewilding podcast inspires you, gives you hope, or makes you think, please subscribe, share it on social media, and become a patron at patreon.com/Peter Michael Bauer. If you're new to rewilding or want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my rewilding workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, and online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. Welcome back, Sheila, to the Rewilding podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's lovely to be back.
Um, so we came up with this idea to have this conversation a couple weeks ago. Somebody was like, I don't know what the question they asked you, or they were sort of assuming that you're not really like a full rewilder or whatever that means, or I don't know. There was just some sort of like, um, aren't you blah blah blah? Like there was this question around like what is somebody who's doing rewilding and how do you like show that? Or how do you prove your like worthiness of rewilding? Like, what was the question that they asked you or
I mean,
the
their
frame?
curiosity was like, "Oh, why are you so active in rewilding? You don't seem like a
Mm,
rewilder,
mm,
and why are you
yes.
so active in Rewild Portland? Why not find a different community that's more like you?" And I was like,
Hmm.
"I've never actually been in a community that shares more of my values than Rewild Portland.
Mm,
That's very confusing to me." But
mm.
um, yeah, I guess the way that I present does not seem very rewildy. And so this person was just confused. Um,
So tell
I-
me about that. Like, what does that mean? The way you present?
so I wear makeup. I don't know if you noticed.
Yes.
I like makeup. I don't only wear earth tones. And I don't do a lot of I don't have a particular earth skill that is like weaving baskets or starting fires. I've done all of those things. I enjoy doing all of those things, but there's not and I don't do a lot. I mean, one of the reasons why I really enjoy being involved in Rewild Portland is because I'm just the kind of person that isn't gonna do anything new on my own. That's not gonna happen. I'm not gonna
Same.
just like go look and like read a book on like how to go gather,
Totally. Yep.
like
Same.
stuff and learn how to weave a basket. I'm not that person. This person I was talking to is that person, and so I think
Mm, mm.
there's part of that where they were like, "But if you're into this, like, why don't you just like do it?" I'm like,
Sure.
I don't know. I don't. That's not how I do things. I do things socially. So,
Mhm.
like, why isn't your house filled with debris? Like a real wilder,
Piles of sticks and rocks and
Yeah,
things. Yeah.
I have plenty of dead things on my walls. Just I feel like I anyway. But and I wear perfume. I know like there's a lot of like concerns about and actually most of my perfumes are like clean perfume, but not all of them. I don't put 100% of my effort into making sure that everything that I buy is like eco-friendly and sustainable anymore. I did do that for a large chunk of my life. And it was hard on my psyche.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I still valued that. Like, I get mostly eco-friendly cleaning products. I try to get like things from sustainable um places, whatever. I got my earrings. Shout out to Kristen Scavenger, Necessary Tools, like I love buying things that my friends made or like local people made. I do put effort into that. But I'm pretty sure the shirt is from Target because I needed a gym shirt and this was comfortable and affordable, So
So
like,
yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's a couple of like overlapping things here, right? Like there's this, first of all, there's like your appearance,
yeah,
right? Which has like, um, which is fascinating to me. Like in even in my book Rewild or Die, I had a chapter. I don't remember the title. I think it was like like rewilding versus identity or something, or image versus rewilding was what the chapter was about. And it was about essentially that, this idea that like somehow there is one sort of aesthetic or like performance of culture that you could identify as rewilding, right? So there's that kind of like how you present yourself is going to, obviously change how people look at you yourself. But like, what are the identifying cultural markers of like rewilding, right? So that's one component of this, right? And then the other one is like, this idea of like, what are you doing? Like you're saying like, I don't weave baskets or forage for food or like, you buy things, try to buy sustainable, local, whatever, right? Like there's sort of like, what are you doing and how are you participating in the economy? So there's like two kind of sides that I'm seeing around this like issue or whatever, right? And I think that they both really stem from like a misconception of what rewilding means. And it's hard to like pin that down because um, and I'll kind of like voice this a little bit too. We talk a lot about hunter-gatherers and rewilding, right? And there's a lot of talk about how specifically immediate return hunter-gatherers are the kind of litmus test for humanity. It is the environment and culture in which we evolved for millions of years. It is what we are best adapted to. And so there's this idea that we have to go back to that. And that infiltrates all kinds of aspects of rewilding. And I would say that the idea isn't to go back to living as immediate return hunter-gatherers, but to look at them as the litmus test for what we create moving into the future and I think that's like one of the big misconceptions because a lot of us do want to like go back and live like hunter-gatherers, right? It's hard to like not sort of see the appeal or the desire or whatever when you're looking at it. You go, oh, the solution is to just do that again, which it is, but not in the way that it was. I mean, that's kind of the crux there. And so I think people tend to see somebody who doesn't present in a particular way. Like, this happened to me all the time when I was a blogger, blogging under the moniker Urban Scout in the aughts, right? Where people would say I was a talker and not a walker because I was right about rewilding, because I was writing about the perception of it and how people see themselves and the world and how that was actually what rewilding was. And it didn't actually matter what I did. And no matter what, people would always call me a poser. And I am a poser in many ways, right? But like not in like broadly encompassing way of rewilding. And it wasn't until I did Lynx Vilden's Stone Age immersion project and had photos of me like with a gnarly beard in full buckskin that people stopped talking shit about me being a talker and not a walker. It was like, which to me is really lame that had to happen, because again, I think that when people have this notion that rewilding means like returning to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle or like living primitively, which it could, I mean, that's the thing, that could be your, rewilding journey, but that's not like
yeah,
the
good for
underlying
you if it
thing,
is. No, yeah,
right? Like that, and people should be doing that because that's like a whole way of keeping particular skills alive. It feels good if that's the thing that you want to do. But it like hurts. It like hurts me to hear you kind of talking about this and like having somebody say these kinds of things to you because like number one, in terms of like the action that we do, and you're like, I don't have these particular skills. Like your skill set is social skills, which like takes a back burner oftentimes to understanding what rewilding means, and if we're looking at if rewilding isn't ancestral technology, it's not a synonym for primitive living and ancestral technology. And that's one of the biggest mistakes people make. I don't do a ton of foraging or hunting. I buy most of my food at the grocery store. Most of the meat I eat is fucking factory farmed because I can't afford to buy grass-fed local shit. Like there isn't there's like life choices and then there's what we're actually able to do economically speaking, which is like a huge portion of that aspect of rewilding is like class consciousness, you know?
yeah. and capacity. Like
Right.
the one of the reasons why I don't put as much effort into every single thing that I buy as conscious consumerism sort of thing was that I am pushing 40 and I've now got chronic illness issues. Like my capacity for like how many things I can hold in my brain and like how rewildy I can be has changed drastically when you're in pain
Totally.
all the time. And if I eat something it's weird, then I'm going to be in trouble for this long. And if I have, migraine, try having a migraine for 9 days and giving a crap where you're buying like,
Right.
like your socks or
Yeah.
whatever. Like it's
Yeah.
pretty hard. So like, and I think that and I mean, thinking about going back to like hunter-gatherer, whatever, like I couldn't do that because I
Yeah.
need medication to live. There's lots of people that are reliant on this
Totally.
civilization for life. And I think it's awesome if you don't have to have that to like go hardcore. Like I definitely that was my goal many years ago, and it's not going to be my goal anymore. And that doesn't mean that I can't participate in the process of rewilding, and
Totally.
and participate in different ways. There's many ways
Yeah.
to do it.
I um I remember at one point in time there was somebody that started critiquing my blog because I was posting about like weaving baskets a lot when I was in that phase of my obsessions. And they were like, how many baskets do I have to weave before I'm considered like a true rewilder or something? And I was just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, none. You don't have to do any of that. What do you mean? What is even a true rewilder, right? Um, and I've been called out many times for policing the word rewilding, and I posted in a more recent episode. I had it titled "The Wrong Way to Rewild" because I wanted to talk about that specifically, and that is a thing really rewilding or not is a really important question to be asking. And, when people do a thing and say this is rewilding, if they're using it in a particular way that I don't agree with, I'm going to be vocal about that. But I'm not gonna guilt trip people into being pure or hardcore enough to some degree that we can't, you know, to some bar that's impossible for any of us to reach. I think about oftentimes people would say that there's sort of an inversion of like uh of not being rewilder enough that are not an inversion, but like a critique that comes from outside the rewilding community about being rewilder enough. That's the same idea, which is like, well, if you hate civilization so much, like why don't you just go live in the forest? And it's like that would be like telling a prisoner, if you don't like prison so much, why don't you just walk out the front door? Right? Like there's just a complete lack of analysis of class consciousness, of like disability awareness, of, just like all these things that kind of overlay into what makes rewilding possible. And
And
from the
just like,
outside,
oh, you can finish.
it looks like we're, hypocritical or like apathetic or certain things, when really it's just we're living contradictions. It's like you can be a captive and be critical of your captivity without an idea of how to escape it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's like a misunderstanding of psychology. Like, because I mean my work with neurodiversity and stuff, a lot of it is talking about executive functioning and human behavior and how we actually create change in our behavior, and it's not usually for most people, it's not, I'd like to change my behavior. Okay, now I changed it, right? Like that's not how we are,
Hmm.
we are little sponges taking it. And, I would say autistic people tend to have an easier time with that at times, the going against the grain. Whereas for me, I feel like the opposite of that, where the social pull of like what I'm around, who I'm around, what the people I'm doing around is like it's like like the drain, like I'm just being sucked
Hmm.
in that direction.
Hmm.
And so it's really important to me to surround myself with people who are living like, in the same value system as me and living in similar ways that I want to, because I will get pulled that way. And it's very easy for it to go the other way. If I have a roommate that's sitting and playing video games, suddenly I'm like, oh, what video games are
Hmm.
available? Like I can just get sucked one way or the other. I think most people are like that to
Hmm.
varying degrees. And when we live in a culture that's constantly selling us these things, I'm weak to it, like I'm really weak to it. So some of this is me being like, I I let go of all responsibility of being a perfect rewilder. And the other part of it is, yeah, I think I could be living my values more in certain ways. And it's hard. Like I also have forgiveness for myself that I do get sucked into consumerism or things like that. Or I could just use vinegar to clean, but I want this fancy, eco-friendly, nice scented thing or whatever.
Mhm.
That's like stupid, right? Like, so, yeah, or if no one I know is inviting me out into the woods or whatever, like maybe I'm spending a lot more time at home and I'm not actually connecting to the land as much as I want to, because that's not what people around me are doing. And
Totally.
I think that is, yeah, there's a lot of judgment about like, well, if you think this is important, why aren't you doing this? And it's like, because that's not how humans work.
Right.
Like, what we need to do is create what we are doing, and Rewild Portland, and other people are doing is creating opportunities and communities and making it easy for people to connect to the land and connect to each other and connect to their values. We need it to be easy because we're all at full capacity in this garbage culture.
Totally. Yeah. Um, you made me think of a few things that I just slipped my mind now.
Sorry.
It's a lot in there. Um, fuck. All right, we'll come back to that. I want to talk about the appearance thing too. The appearance of wildness to a lot of people reflects the misconceptions of wildness as unmanaged or like, and oftentimes I think people think about self-grooming habits and behaviors within humans. And we look at things like, women shaving their legs in some cultures or their armpits in some cultures, men shaving their beards. Like there's different grooming habits. And there's this projection that wildness means no grooming in the same way that we like it means no like management of landscaping or wild animals or plants. It means no management of our own bodies. And so it's like, unkempt hair, dirty, whatever. I don't know. There's lots of things. No makeup, right? Like no whatever. Certain things like that that make people that they're projecting this false notion of wildness not just onto the land, but onto our bodies as well. And there's plenty of, there's theories. Camilla Power has a book about the origins of makeup in human society, and that being potentially one of the very first instances of culture. We have like red ochre is one of the very first things that we see in the archaeological record of humans using that's like, what the hell was the purpose for this? It's not processing any food. It's not hunting or gathering. Like, why were people using red ochre in this particular way? It's not good camouflage, right? So what was it? And there's a lot of theories specifically that it was like makeup, and it has to do with like blood and menstruation and all kinds of things like that. This is sort of fascinating, to look into. But it relates back to that idea of like somehow wildness has to look a certain way, or like rewilders have to look a certain way. And when I was blogging regularly, part of my goal as my blogging persona, Urban Scout, was to be a kind of Trojan horse into like the art scene of Portland and to spread animistic ideas within the arts community. And so I wore, like American apparel and, vintage clothes from the vintage shops around town and like Goodwill and whatever. I basically tried to blend in to the aesthetics of the Portland scene in the early aughts so that I could like just fit in enough to then project my ideas within that subculture. And so, while I was doing that and I saw it working to an extent, other people were judging me from outside of that community that were like, well, he's just a hipster, blah, blah, blah. Right. Like, you could just forget anything he has to say because it's clearly just like an aesthetic novelty that he's embracing. And to a degree, I actually agree with that. To a certain extent, I think it's like the show Portlandia. They wanted to have me on the show at one point. It was, I think, the very first episode. Actually, there's a scene where they're dumpster diving, and he gets a sweater out of the dumpster or whatever, and they wanted me to walk by with roadkill in my hand as my character, Urban Scout, and as sort of this like insane, extreme forager, urban forager, whatever. And I almost did it, but there was this level of like the people who were watching Portlandia were laughing at Portland, I think, even though they tried to sell it as, oh, we're laughing. It's, made by people from here that, and they're not from here, but, that are that are from here. And it's about celebrating Portland's like quirkiness. But really, whenever I saw anything about it, it was mostly people like laughing at Portland. Of course, it wasn't just Portland. Portlandia is just like an example of that sort of subculture that exists all around the United States or did throughout that time period. But and I kind of see that as like part of what I was doing was sort of a spectacle, right? So there were definitely people who were watching what I was doing and laughing at it and who were not in on the joke. But there was also plenty of people who were in on the joke who got it. And those were the people, that was my real audience. Um, the other side, like kind of the flip side of that, is that this woman wrote a dissertation for her PhD and included a chapter in it about anarcho-primitivism and aesthetics and talked about me and how I was basically presenting this commercially digestible image of anarcho-primitivism or rewilding in this way that the mainstream could just easily loop in and publish without like watering down my own ideas because I was handing them like the aesthetic package they were looking for. And then they could just put it out to the world and not understand that I was doing exactly that, right? Like this idea of like being a Trojan horse, of like embracing the tools and aesthetics of mainstream culture in order to project a different idea that is sort of, then I get to control the narrative if I'm presenting it in a way that looks like it's the same. So I think about this with aesthetics, and even today I dress sort of, I think I basically consider all dress performance. It's all
Yeah.
costume. Everything is a costume. Everything is a mask. And there are people who are like, well, I don't really think about what I look like. And I'm like, okay, but then why do you look exactly like everyone in your subculture? Like people who are like, I'm counterculture. I don't dress in any particular way. And I'm like, that's weird because all your friends and you dress the same, and your hairstyles are the same. Like you're choosing this. And I don't think it's subconscious. I think it is conscious. I think people choose it. And maybe there's some
I think
subconsciousness
some
to
of it
it.
is that thing that I'm talking about though, where you just kind of you're around it and then you start to like you like how that looks because you are associating that with people that you like and then that becomes a thing. And I noticed that the more time I spend on social media because it's part of my job, it's changing what things I like. Like I've never really been into pastels, but there's like a lot of like cutesy pastel stuff that I see on social media. Now I'm like, oh, well, maybe I want some pa it really is like a weird thing, like what you find visually appealing will change depending on it's so human, for us
Totally.
to want to
Yes,
just naturally. I don't think that it's always conscious. But there has to be, yeah,
that's
like some
fair.
it would be, but I think it's silly to not be aware of it, and I think
Sure. Yeah. I
it's
mean, I remember when I was in like seventh grade, the very first week of seventh grade, I was sitting in the cafeteria and I just was sort of staring at everybody. I like finished my lunch and I was just sitting there looking out around the room and I was like, oh, there's the jock table. There's the like preppy table. There's the like cool alt goth
yeah.
grungy table. And I'm at the nerd table. Oh shit. I mean, there's like, it was like becoming it's like when AI becomes self-aware or something, like
Yeah,
it was like this sort of self-awareness, which then like propelled me into, my lifelong poserhood of trying to get out of being a nerd
the
and
whole rewilding thing is just
failing
the
miserably,
justification.
losing friends over it. Um, and losing my sense of self over it out of, self-doubt and things. But I think today, when I look at what I wear, I definitely am 100% conscious of it. Even just now, even today, like I was like, I'm going to be on the podcast, like, oh, I'm going to wear my Cabela's like camo. Like I'm very like, why this today? I don't know. I don't know, but I have like specific outfits, right? Like I have my bushcrafty vibe so that I can like infiltrate rewilding into the bushcraft scene. And, I've got my like professor archaeologist sort of vibe, and then I've got my anarchist, like all black punk vibe. Like I've just got so many different, I've got the buckskin thing. And it's definitely like, what environment am I going into? How do I want to be presented? How do I want people to perceive me? You
Yeah.
know, do I want people to embrace me or see me as an outsider? Or like so much of it too is this notion of identity with insiders and outsiders. Um, and I think, this is something that can be really well leveraged too in terms of spreading notions of rewilding by being conscious of this as like a white man. What other white men do I want to have be influenced by me by them seeing themselves in me, right?
Hmm.
Like wearing a Cabela's hat. Like how many dudes are gonna look at me and if I'm wearing this Cabela's hat and a flannel and be like, this person is kind of like me, and I'll listen to them more than if I were like wearing an Antifa t-shirt and a black bandana and what all these different things, right? Like, how is the perception going to be different? And what is my goal with that? And again, I think that with rewilding, there isn't a single identity of rewilding because it's not that. It's a way of perceiving things. It's like animism, right? As this sort of global expanse of how different people perceive of the land, it takes form in a million different ways, and the aesthetics across animist societies are completely different.
Yeah. I will say, so like you talking about like, okay, you're a man, and so you can, I love that yeah, there's certain men that are going to look at you and be like, oh, he's like me, I'll listen to him, right? I think there is something with me being a woman, or at least looking like one, and and wearing makeup, there's a whole story about wear makeup and shaving your legs and having your nails done and things like that around, and there's a history to it that is, some of the history is, yes, ritual and culture and all of that, and some of the history is oppression and
Totally. Yeah,
placating men and all of these different things. And
absolutely.
so, like, to me, what's important for myself is knowing why I'm doing this. If I don't feel like shaving my legs, I'm not going to. If I feel like it, I'm going to. If I don't feel like wearing makeup, I'm not going to if I feel like it. And for me, putting on makeup in the morning is part of my morning ritual. It's like a morning meditation. It's a sensory experience. Um, it's an aesthetic experience. It is my me time. And so I put on, makeup in the morning if I'm camping sometimes, or if I'm, going to clean the house today. It has nothing to do with if anyone's going to see me, even though, yeah, I like people to think I look nice. That's great. But let's be real, in the rewilding community, I think that I would be embraced more if I wore no makeup or less makeup. I think I'm actually doing the opposite of like people pleasing with that. And, one of the things that this person that was asking me questions brought up, and I think is a valuable insight, is that if there are women who are in the rewilding community to try to push against something that they've been pushing, like it has been pushed on them. Like, I guess I need to shave my legs, I need to shave my armpits, and I
Mhm.
need to wear makeup, and I need to do my hair. And if I don't do that, I'm less of a woman, or I'm less valuable. And then they come into the rewilding space, they go, oh, I can be comfortable like this. And then maybe they see me as as a board member, as a more leader in the community, doing all of those things, and they go, oh, maybe this isn't as much of a safe space. And I don't want that. I
Mhm.
don't want to project. What I want to project is do what you want, like,
Yeah.
wild out. Like, and another thing that I do consider, and is something that I think about a lot and haven't come to terms with my exact opinion on this or whatever, is like when I get my nails done, which I don't actually get my nails done very often. Um, but when I do, this is toxic garbage. Like, this really shouldn't exist. This is bad. This is like really bad. I don't have a justification for it. Like, I just want to look pretty regardless. And so and makeup and perfume, there are like toxins. I mean, I'm pretty careful with my makeup, and like I said, with most of my perfume, about getting things that are organic, or more on the natural side, and knowing what's in them. And I do take time to do that. And sometimes I'm like, I just want this. Like, my nails, like, sometimes I just want this. And that's not in accordance of my values. Like razors for the legs. I have like the leaf razor, so it's like reusable blades. But for a long time, yeah, I was using like a Venus razor with those little throwaway things
Yeah, I
like
mean
that.
that's what I use. Yeah, I
It's
don't.
not, you should try the leaf one. It's pretty good.
Hmm.
Their razors aren't that good, but you can buy better razors to put in it, because you can put
Are
any
you a
razor.
brand ambassador? Are you
I'm
branding
not.
right
I maybe I
now?
should.
Just
I got
kidding.
it kind of like a few months ago, so I'm still just excited about it.
Yes, yes.
Um, but also it comes in different colors, which that'll sell me on anything. Anyway,
Yeah.
But trying to make those like little choices is great. And like I do know that some of the things that I'm doing uh is not it's not great. It isn't in accordance with my values. Aside from that, some of my values are fuck it. Like
Yeah.
that sometimes
Right.
you have to say fuck it
Yeah.
because this is what we're like you said, like you're in a prison, sometimes you're just gonna make the prison a little bit more comfortable so that you can get through the day.
Yeah.
And there's no real justification for it other than like I'm just a person, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this comes down to a couple of other aspects of rewilding, which is, the interrelationship between purity and fundamentalism, right? As a society, I think in the America or the United States in particular, it was created by the Puritans, and we have even when we're atheists or animists or whatever, there's still these just like lingering aspects of purity and fundamentalism that permeate into things. Like there's like fundamentalist atheists that are just like horrible about particular things, or environmentalists or veganism or whatever. Like any kind of like ideological thing, somehow there's always just this fundamentalism. And on the one hand, like I get it because it's really hard for me to like follow a thing like being on the wagon or falling off the wagon or whatever, right? Like that can start a whole spiral of making it really challenging to get back into a thing, right? So I
Yeah.
get the kind of like all or nothing 100% like AA type thing of, or like there's a book that came out a while back about quitting smoking cigarettes that was basically like the secret to quitting smoking is just never smoke ever again. Which like, with addictive chemicals, it's easy for us to like understand that because it's this external thing that we're putting in our body. But I think one of the things that we kind of forget about is that the dopamine response to particular things that make us feel good, regardless of whether it's a drug or just an activity or an extra thing, or like, purchasing shit when you're feeling bad gives you like dopamine hits. Like all of that stuff is, is brain activity that has happened to us through evolution. And so if we are doing those things, we can't, if we start to shame ourselves too much, I actually think a little bit of shame is good. Because I think that's, when a little bit of shame is enough for me to like make those decisions differently if I can feel a little
Yeah.
bit beforehand or whatever. But like if I do it and then I'm just like feeling hella guilty and shameful afterward, then it's going to be a problem because I'm going to like get in that like a shame
Yeah, now like,
spiral or
well, now I
whatever,
feel
right?
like garbage. I need to buy more stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, right. And then it's just this horrible spiral where you're drinking more again or smoking or whatever. I have lots of different aspects of what I consider addiction, but it's not a chemical addiction per se, but just like societal things. I mean, I love.
Still
Uh,
chemicals. It's just your
right,
own
right,
making
exactly. Yes,
chemicals.
exactly. It's environmental impact on the chemicals inside of us rather than like something we're ingesting into our bodies, and that's a substance, external substance that's coming in. It's an environmental response usually, right? That gives us those dopamine hits, or a cultural thing that we do. And I have loads of these, and it's always just been really hard because there are, and I was a vegan. I was like a fundamentalist vegan for 2 years of my life. And I have nothing against veganism per se. I definitely have things against militarism in terms of that and the fundamentalism that comes along with it. Um, but, when we're doing rewilding stuff, there's part of me that I want to say like, if it's not fun, don't do it. But that's also not true either because there are lots of great things in terms of discomfort that that I put myself through intentionally to experience learning, right? Like learning happens through discomfort. So discomfort is not always fun, right? Learning isn't always fun. Isn't going to always be fun. So it's not that though, but it's still like it has to be like heart driven, I guess. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Like it has to be consent, based, where you're choosing to do this thing because you want to experience the discomfort for the learning. And of course, the world puts us through things without our choice, without our consent all the time, and we're constantly learning from what the world is doing, and that's an element of it too. There are things out of our control that we can still learn from. I think about this with as a child, there's like radical unschooling is this idea of like let your kids kind of do whatever. And
That's not what unschooling is.
I know
Okay.
that's radical unschooling though, right? Unschooling is its own thing, but radical unschooling is like kind of letting your children do whatever. And again, like if that's what people choose to do, that's fine. But I can remember loads of circumstances in my childhood, and we've probably talked about this before. I've probably mentioned this on my podcast where my parents put like forced me to do things I didn't want to do. And I was like screaming and having a temper tantrum. And then I did it. And I was like, oh.
I'm so glad my parents made me do stuff. I wouldn't have done anything. I would have been that kid that just like sat in a corner. Like I would have just, if I could have spent my entire childhood like reading Babysitter's Club, like I would have just
I
done
mean,
that.
maybe
And
that would have been fine.
like, I
Maybe you would
don't
have
think
turned out
so.
fine. But
First of all, I would not be doing this because I was super socially anxious as a kid.
mm, mm,
And my dad was like, no, and just kept putting me in
mm,
sports and putting me in
mm,
social situations and art classes. And like, he was just like, I see that you're anxious. You're getting over this,
mm.
and just, and now I have no social, almost no social anxiety. I'm very grateful for that. And it's
Yeah,
like, I can see, and there are kids that were pushed and that traumatized them. And there are
totally.
kids that were
Right.
pushed and
Yeah.
it helped them. And some of that is being like aware of your child and actually
Hmm.
having a relationship with them and treating them like a whole ass human being.
Yeah.
But anyway, my point is, yeah, I think that I agree with you that there is something about overcoming discomfort that's really important. And if we're too uncomfortable, we're going to give up. We're going to get
Right.
discouraged. We're
Right.
going to,
Exactly.
lose the
Yeah.
momentum. Like you have to, yeah, heart driven is a good way of saying it. Like it has to feel right for you.
And I really feel like we have to start looking at civilization as a drug in a way, right? Like, and recognize the dopamine addiction response to so much of what is put in front of us. If we trace this all the way back to like the origins of civilization and agriculture, literally we could think of it as grains because the grains, connect to the same receptors in our brain that like opiates do. And so there could be an actual like addiction to grains, which would make sense. Um, but also, if we just think about the addiction to comfort, and that the comfort that civilization offers is predictability of food source through grain production at a particular kind of scientific scale, right? Where like you can, in a stable climate, you can predict that an acre of grain is going to produce a specific amount. And if we just do that year to year to year, we'll know exactly how much food we have at all times. We take control of the food supply rather than being like a hunter gatherer who has to, be opportunist with what's here and there and doesn't necessarily eat a meal every single day, but is not starving to death, right? But there's some level of predictability that is and safety in that regard that like the state or civilization, these hierarchies like sell to people to bring them in, and then the amount of comforts that they try to lump on top of that to keep people sort of like entrenched in this world, entrenched in captivity. I mean, think about like how you would captivate a wild animal. You feed them, right? You feed them and feed them and feed them until they're in the cage. And that's exactly what we did with, the predictability of food. If I'm feeding my crows every morning, my crows, I have crows outside my house. They're not mine. But I feed them, and if I fed them every single morning, at a certain time, that would become a predictable food source for them. And I could eventually like trap them. You know what I mean? And I think that's essentially one of the challenges and problems with domestication is this idea that we've become captives, but nobody wants to like fully recognize the extent of our captivity or really what even breaking from that captivity could look like. And one of the phrases that I really appreciated from Daniel Quinn, um, who is an author, he wrote Ishmael and Beyond Civilization and A Story of Being and stuff. One of the things that he liked to say was civilization isn't a physical space. So this idea of like if you think cities are so bad, why don't you go live in the wilderness? Civilization is not a physical space per se. It's a social space. Like you can walk away from the culture and society of civilization and still exist in a city, right? Like a city is definitely a product of the upscaling of agricultural societies, but humans have always lived in encampments with each other and not outside by themselves somewhere or far away in a wilderness somewhere. So being able to like think about rewilding not as running away to the wilderness, but as abandoning the social space of civilization to create something new, I think is like the more like the deeper framework that is missing from so many people who just latch onto the word and don't really deep dive into the philosophy behind it, and
And
the
that
world.
is the, when, me talking to this person and saying like, well, the rewilding that I do is social. And I say, well, you're creating community, you're doing social things, but it's around uh an ideal, or it's around this idea and this rewilding. And if you're doing the social but you're not doing the rewilding, then you're a poser basically. And it's
Right.
like, but the social is the rewilding.
Right. That's
And
exactly
that's
right.
a really difficult thing to explain when someone's perception of rewilding is what you eat and what you wear and
Totally.
what you're
Yes.
doing as a
Yes.
craft.
Yes.
And all of those things are part of it. And all
Right.
those things are part of the socializing of it. But the thought process, the rewilding your brain, rewilding your
Hmm.
mind, like trying to step like just in the thinking, in just the whatever decision you make, how did you come to that decision
Yes.
is going to
Yes.
be a
Yes.
rewilding, part of this.
Exactly.
And then how we are just the idea of creating community is going against what civilization wants us to do,
Totally.
of this idea of
Yes.
isolate, create a nuclear family, buy all your own stuff, don't share. I live with 5 people. I have a pretty communal living situation, and I have my friend Tessa cooks for me, and I pay her for that, and all really good ingredients and things like that. Any opportunity I have to include my community into my life in more than just let's get coffee and catch up on our lives, like actually living with other people in all these different ways, like that to me is the most important thing and is a rewilding practice, not it's not next to rewilding, it's not around rewilding, like that is the rewilding.
Totally. When I was like 19, I got obsessed with Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth. And it's a really great, interview series with Bill Moyers. I don't know if it stands up to the test of time. Obviously, that was like 25 years ago when I watched it, and I think it was already old at that point. But one of the things that he talks about in there is this idea of like the two sides of a cultural coin, or like of the coin of people, is myth and ritual. And I kind of like went down this spiral of that and went pretty deep. And I was like, really, if you want to go at broad strokes, thought and action, right? Myth and ritual. Um, Myth and thought and ideas, or ideas and action, right? Like those are two sides of the same coin. So when people are say, when people would say you're a talker and not a walker, it's like you can't walk without the talk and you can't talk without the walk. Like they're two sides of the same fucking thing. And some of us focus on the mythological aspects of it, right? The how and the why. And some people focus on the physical artifacts that are left behind by people, or the actions. And obviously, everybody does a blend of both in different ways. But I really think that there's this obsession with aesthetics and the physicality of a thing, and not the like underlying cultural ideas and stories behind it. And that's like classically, that's what cultural appropriation is, right? Like if you think about the sort of symbol of cultural appropriation in the United States is white people co-opting the war bonnet, the Lakota war bonnet, which is like the feather headdress, right? And if you are a Lakota person, you don't just make one of those for fun and aesthetics. Each of the feathers on it is like a gift to you, that is like a sign of respect, that somebody thinks that you're a wise person. And then you build this whole outfit out of it, and you're literally wearing the respect that people have bestowed upon you and your culture, right? And then you have some idiot like dancing around a fire at Coachella wearing a headdress like this because they think it looks pretty, right? And, culture is constantly changing. People get ideas from other people and stuff, but there's no meaning behind it other than the aesthetics. And to me, that's sort of this thing, the meaning behind a lot of these aesthetics is lost on people because they're obsessed with the aesthetics and not the meaning. And rewilding is the meaning behind any kind of aesthetics that could emerge from it. And so because it's so entrenched with ancestral skills and these other things like that, there is an aesthetic that can emerge of that in particular. But that's also very, you know, it's just limiting. It's a limiting factor to think that the aesthetics have to come from like buckskin or something, right? Like buckskin was one tiny textile in terms of like human history and culture of our clothing. Buckskin is just one little thing, but it's become this sort of like pan primitive skills clothing item rather than like, hand woven, loom woven clothes. Like, some of that stuff is becoming more prevalent now. But like the idea that, there was just this one thing or that you have to fit this particular aesthetic is a very limiting factor when it comes to rewilding. And I think that there's this level of us, of the urban rewilders, that we get kind of shoved to the side oftentimes for these ostentatious or sensationalized aesthetics of people who are doing things like Lynx Vilden, for example, who do wear all buckskins and go hunting and gathering in the forest away from civilization. And that's fucking awesome. And I've done it and I love it. And I do it from time to time, right? But like there's this other level of like the culture building side of things that is trying to make it accessible across the board, and we lose out because media attention wants to be for these sort of over the top icons, and I know this from it takes one to know one. This is my character, Urban Scout. I used to walk around Portland in a loincloth covered in mud and start fires, and I got like international attention for it. As soon as I took off the loincloth and put on normal clothes and was doing the exact same thing, nobody wants to, nobody's interested, right? So, I mean, part of this is a marketing thing, right? Like, okay, well, then how do we get attention? But part of it is also about authenticity. And how do we really, if we want more people to understand that rewilding isn't an aesthetic, it's a value system, how do we get it to a lot of people, right? I mean, that's a rhetorical question that each of us does in our own way. And I think what you were saying earlier about like, I was talking about my choice to look a certain way to like have people identify with me to get in the ideas. I think what you're doing is different in that you are like hold fast, or steadfast in like keeping the aesthetics of rewilding in a broader scope so that people can be like, oh, it is more than just this particular thing that I thought it was. Right. And I think
I
that's
don't
what
have to grow out my armpit hair to come hang out with these people. I
That's
can.
right. That's right. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And if you want to, that's fine. But like,
yeah, we
you
love it.
know, um, how do we build culture and aesthetics that people can feel like they are at home as well without having to feel like, they have to change themselves too much in any kind of way. Um, yeah,
Yeah, just make it as accessible as possible. I think yeah, that in some ways I can be sort of what did you say? You were like something about you being like sneaky and like getting into
Trojan horse.
like a
Yeah,
Trojan horse. Yeah, and I think that um there's ways where like my social media is somewhat popular or whatever, and I do integrate a lot of rewilding ideas that maybe people wouldn't that people are hearing that maybe they wouldn't have heard before, or like I'll talk about animism in my classes, or I was just at I was doing a training for a big, company yesterday, and the there's a guy who's an assistant to the space, to the office space or whatever. And I was like telling him about our Philosopher's Fire. We have this free community event, and we were talking about animism last time, and someone was talking about the spirit of the space and how to like connect to the spirit of a space, and I was like, oh, you're the ambassador to the spirit of this space, and he was like, oh, I love that, and like
Mhm.
getting really into it, and like I can kind of sneakily get these different ideas out there and talk about rewilding it to people that might have not been interested if it was just like, oh, I need to go out into the woods and eat mushrooms or something. And it's like, well, you can, that's awesome. And you can just do these other things as well.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think there's also elements. This comes up to, I think, within activist culture of like not doing enough, not uh like fighting against the system enough. And as an organization, Rewild Portland, we don't do anything like that really. We don't lobby, we don't try to change laws, we don't do direct action or invisible things of any kind of nature. And I could see us being called out for, that kind of a thing in terms of rewilding and resisting civilization, which is absolutely a component of rewilding that I don't talk about often because of the dangers that come up with that. And that's why Rewild Portland is more focused on community building than anything else, because we want to just create those connections and values together and then see what kind of things we dream up together, you know.
Yeah.
And nobody ever has to tan a hide or wear buckskin to be a rewilder. Nobody ever has to like hunt a deer with a bow and arrow or hunt at all to be a rewilder, right? Like it's just if I like could zero it into one action that I would think of if people were focused on, it's just like how do we create less of an impact and more biodiversity and biomass? Like if we're trying to figure out any way to like store carbon or keep species alive, it's that, how do we minimize our disturbance and maximize the potential for regeneration? And if you're doing anything in that capacity, whether that's, community building around sharing those ideas and those values, that is in and of itself a part of that practice, you know. It's a requirement. And I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. I'm writing a piece. I'm writing again, which is really fun.
Yeah.
Because I've missed writing. I didn't realize how much I missed it and how good it makes me feel. And I used to write all the time as a blogger. And I've been doing the podcast, which is fun too. But I started writing again. And right now I'm writing about legitimacy within the state structure. And essentially what that is propaganda, and if we want to create another world, we have to envision it and we have to be sharing the ideas around it, not just falling, into the same routines of like looking a certain way or whatever. Like we're not scenesters here. We're not trying to impress with our aesthetic. We're trying to change the world. And so that starts with the mythology, you know, myth and ritual. So how do we create a myth that then people can ritually enact, or how do we create the ideas that people can put into action, right? Or come up with new strategies to put into action. And I think that is kind of the core of rewilding, which, there's lots of organizations that do similar stuff to Rewild Portland, teach skills here and there. And I keep coming back to this thing that, like, for me, as the sort of the founder and catalyst for it initially, is that to me, what I wanted to do was subconsciously or consciously create an organization that was a vision keeping organization more than anything else, is this idea of rewilding. And anything that we do or teach or whatever can fall within that category as long as we're like continuing to sort of hold this message of what it means. Like the Basketry Guild is just a group of people that teach baskets. They're not going to be teaching rewilding as a philosophy or perspective if you go to learn a basket there, and that's fine. But if you take one of my basket classes, you're trapped with me for two
You're
days,
gonna get an earful.
and I'm going
Yeah,
to start with baskets, and that's going to connect into all these other things, like environmental stewardship. How are we getting the materials for these baskets? What does that mean? How are we interacting with the landscape? Who's been interacting with the landscape? Where did these plants come from? Like, there's just so many ways of wrapping kind of anything that I teach back into the sort of overall encompassing vision of Rewild Portland. And that's what really separates our organization from people who are just teaching skills, is the vision, the how, and the why, specifically the why. Why are we doing this? Um,
Yeah, and one of the things that excites me about rewilding is that I've always been um wanting to fight for liberation and decolonization and equity and all of these things that the government hates now. And and that has always looked like going against something, you know? And aside from maybe getting into permaculture, definitely was like a getting into like a creative visioning of the future. And that's what I just feel like. I feel like it's very important that we have people fighting against, the evils in
totally,
society.
absolutely.
And I feel like my role, where I feel the most aligned, is when I'm creating something.
Yeah,
Where are we going? Like, yes, we don't
right.
want this, but what do we want? And
Yes,
Rewild Portland to me is so inspiring because we're always thinking about what do we want? What kind of a world do we want? How do we want to interact with the land? How do we want to interact with each other? How do we want to interact with ourselves? And it's an ongoing experiment. It's an ongoing process. It's not this is what we want. No, it's we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I know we want to be more in alignment with the land. I know we want to be more in alignment with like other than human kin. I know that we want to be more in alignment with deprogramming these garbage ideas that we've gotten from colonial society. Like I know we know some things and we slowly are moving toward that. All people in rewilding moving toward that in a different way together, you know, and seeing what works and what doesn't work and looking to the past and looking at hunter-gatherers and what has it meant to be human in the past and seeing are there some things from that we want to go back to and are there some things that we would love to go back to but we can't, and then and we see where we've come from and what we don't want, we definitely don't want to go back to, and then how do we take all of those ideas in learning about what it is to be a human from our past, from our present, from actually connecting with our bodies, from talking to the other people around us, from, connecting with the land? Okay, does it mean to be human? And now in myth, and now how do we ritualize that? How do we
Yeah.
enact that in our lives in small ways and big ways? And it's all an experimental process that we're doing together without the promise of some ideal or some dogma, And
Yes.
I think that that's beautiful, and I'm very excited.
Yeah, and it's really hard to get people to know that, right? It's like from the
Yeah.
outside, how do we do this? Right now, we're working with a fundraising firm to figure out how to kind of like, get Rewild Portland more sustainable. And one of the things that they're asking me about is the theory of change. Like, I've talked to them about all this stuff, and they're like, wow, this is like a really complex idea. Do you guys have a theory of change? I'm like, I don't know what that is, but one of our board members has been telling us we need this. Shout out to Paul A.
Yeah.
Um, and so, we're even trying to figure this out as we go, which is I think one of the reasons why people often look to Rewild Portland as a sort of model for figuring this out and building something like this in their own place. And I just want to put a shout out there for that too. If it's something that if anybody's listening right now and is like, this is something I would like to experiment with here, we offer that kind of a feedback, and especially if you're able to attend the Rewilding conference that we run in January, that's a really great opportunity to connect with people here, and sort of see a model that you could potentially, mimic.
Yeah, we're a franchise if you
Not a franchise. We don't own the term. That's one of the things that we've actually consciously done is not owned the term or trademarked it or because it seems antithetical to the term itself. However, then it does allow for people to co-opt it, water it down, etc. So we're pretty steadfast in our
but
definition of it.
it's less about the word though, because there is Wild Awake Ireland, right? Which is like
Absolutely, yeah.
very
People don't
similar.
have to use the word rewilding in their organization. Like Lucy from Wild Awake doesn't use the word rewilding really much, and was considering using it as a name initially, but obviously, the word rewilding is problematic in different places for different reasons, and especially in Europe, it's mostly the land conservation concept. Although all of this is changing a lot, and pretty rapidly. It's changing faster than I thought. There's a lot of people that are now a lot of conservation rewilders that have been against cultural rewilding for a long time are actually shifting their perception of it. And a lot of this, I think, is coming from academia, to be honest. Like, um, there's just more people interested in that I think we're coming up, like younger ecologists and anthropologists who were looking at this conservation rewilding over the last decade, and then seeing this cultural rewilding, and like, what is this thing actually about? And does this apply to? And I think that there's sort of a more radicalization that happens within the younger sort of college age people that are environmentalists and become conservationists because of that are now embracing cultural rewilding. I've seen it. And I think it's really awesome. And it's, not to toot my own horn, but it is something that I predicted would happen 20 years ago. I'm like, these are going to come back together at some point, probably through traditional ecological knowledge, because that's a conservation strategy that was gaining momentum and is now like huge. And I think it's just going to keep coming together like that. And so, yeah, I really hope that happens. Obviously, are there any other thoughts that you have on this subject? I feel like we did a pretty good, well-rounded convo.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Peter. I guess you got to tell me, am I rewildy enough?
Sheila, you're rewildy enough, but you don't need my approval. Am I
I,
rewildy enough?
I don't know. questionable. I've heard you're a hipster poser.
I
I don't
am. Oh, yeah. Side note, there was back before when I was blogging a lot, there was a website that was kind of pre-Reddit. God, what was it called? Oh, it was called Metafilter. And it was sort of a Reddit type website in the mid-aughts. And somebody posted a thing in there that was like Urban Scout, sincere crusader for sustainability, or poser hipster douchebag. And every single word was was a link to a different thing I had done or a different article that was written about me. And I was just like, can't I be both? Which, I mean, I guess this is one of the things I want to say about this. I guess this is the sort of summation is like, life is fucking complex, right? And what we're trying to do is a lot more complex than what people are used to hearing, like sort of black and white answers. We are constantly living in a contradiction in that we are captives of a society and we don't know how to break free from captivity. You know, we have ideas, and some of us are tunneling out secretly. Some of us are trying to fight our way out through the front door. Some of us are trying to sneak our way out. Some of us are like, well, the walls are going to come collapsing down at some point anyway. So let's build a little thing in here and maybe we'll live there after the walls collapse. Like, and some people are fucking bootlickers who are, you know, not trying to do anything at all. Fuck you if you're a bootlicker. But you know what I mean? Like there's just so much complexity and maybe some people are doing all of those different things in different ways, in different capacities at different times, right? And so we can't hold ourselves to some high level that is not possible for us to actually reach. You know, I remember when I was like 16 and I read Ishmael and I was like, my life goal is going to be to live with live as a hunter gatherer in a tribe with people in the forest because civilization is going to collapse in like a year or two, you know. And I did like a vision quest when I was 21, and in that, you know, in a whatever tradition, it was a tracker school tradition, which I both think was fine and also regret to this day. But in that experience, I had this like my vision was your vision is not going to be a reality. It was you're dude, you're never going to fucking live as a hunter gatherer. Like it's just not in the cards. Like the world is too complex in this particular way and it's not something that you're going to do. So you need to like get over that idea and move on and keep building towards something akin to that, but not that. You set the bar too high for yourself. And I remember just like sobbing, you know, for like a day and being like, okay, that's it. This is it. But then ever since then, you know, just driven to uh, bring more people into the fold and create whatever it is that we're creating. This cottywomple, if you've been to my Rewilding 101 class and you know what that term means. But anyway, yeah, we have to embrace complexity and contradiction in rewilding. That's my
Yeah.
final thought, right?
Nuance, man. It'll get you.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed. And
All
I get
right.
my final message, I guess, is that if you are worried about getting into rewilding because you're afraid that you couldn't go hardcore enough and people would call you a poser, join the poser club with me and Peter, and you're welcome to come in that way. And if you are afraid that rewilding is going to be one particular thing, remember that it's not, and you can do it in whatever way actually works for you and makes sense for you, and you are welcome. Who, you know, that's something with the being on the board, you know, we talk about who is our as an organization you're supposed to have who is your audience or who is your what is the word like the
Yeah,
people that we're
audience. Sure.
sure like
Your
who's your audience who
community.
are we who are as our demographic, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I keep getting mad because I say everybody and that doesn't work for you know for trying to set organizational goals, but for reality in reality every single person for me is our audience is someone that I would love to get hooked in because I think that rewilding is for every single person. That's the point, right? Granted, some people have a lot of work of deprogramming
True.
and things like and learning and educating and whatever in order to participate. But ideally, everyone would get there, right? Like that is the ideal. So you are whoever is listening, you are welcome.
Awesome. Always a pleasure. Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been lovely. Everyone, if you like listening to me talk, you should find me at ADHD Coach Sheila on various platforms.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Rewilding podcast. Check out the show notes to connect with my guest and for a list of resources that we mentioned in our conversation. If this episode inspired you, made you think more deeply, or gave you some new tools to use, make sure to subscribe and become a patron at patreon.com/Peter Michael Bauer. If you're new to rewilding or want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my rewilding workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, or online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. Thanks for listening.